Part of the show is even guess the time. I mean, you are coming up. Oh, it's going to be.
This shit is going to be cut out, right?
This guy is evil. Well, you know that shit's going to come.
You pass me on top of my own program. Welcome to the 0100 Naija podcast.
Zada, your host.
And this is the scientist here, welcoming you to episode 5.
This episode is going to be a banger.
Yes, and it's a full house, please. It's a full house. The Bricksmen are in the building.
Of course.
Right? Yeah, this is
Friends of the
introducing,
podcast.
of course, once again. Manager, please introduce yourself.
It is Suleiman here.
Yeah, aka
manager.
exactly. Well, he decided to add that to his title, but we all know what he is. He's simply our steward here. Aka El Nino. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And yes, Rep.
Okay, I just go simply. I'm Murtala,
Yes.
and I'm also part of the friends of this podcast.
Murtala, aka Class Rep. What is online avatar name?
Sweet chicks.
Let's Samuri is the way.
Yeah, they call him the love of something. But let's leave it like that. And yes, the big man himself.
Voice is not new actually. This is Mr. T.
Yeah,
The big man is said.
exactly. The senior bros. Welcome, sir. You
Thank
cut
you.
two for us. Yes, Yoruba man.
Oh yes.
How you doing?
This is the eye candy of the show. Olusegun, aka. I'm not idea actually about the
Candyman. Yes, and
Fear for your impact.
Hussein Yusuf, and you can call me by Hooks.
yes, you don't know him, Captain Hooks himself.
Not hooks.
All right then.
We have someone in the house that would prefer not to be mentioned.
Yeah, we call him.
Silent friend of the podcast.
He's the Hulk.
This is our silent
He's
friend
as
for
silent
today.
as Hulk is in the movies. And he just remain in the background for now. When he feels like he comes in, introduces himself. Oh, happy. All right then. So, you're welcome to the episode once again.
Thank you.
The scientist, what are we going to be talking about basically today?
Right. Today we're going to be taking a look back at our journey so far in the episode. Well, we haven't gone that far into it.
Yeah.
Into the podcast, sorry. We haven't gone that far into it, but it's still paramount that we take these occasional glimpses at our journey so far. And seeing as we just concluded a mini-series,
Yep.
right, into the
3
podcast,
episode long.
3 episode mini-series, right?
Over 2 hours, 30 minutes or so.
Actually, yes.
Kudos to us. We
No,
killed it.
And to us that listen to
2 hours, 30 minutes of content, but
Yes.
weeks and weeks of work, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and it seems only a minute ago when we started about, and it's 5 weeks already. And
Time flies.
the people in this room are also there that day. That's very
They
eventful day.
encouraged us.
Yeah.
I can
Not really.
attest to that. So.
Well, not. But they are all here, so and they are all appreciated. Right. So, going into this episode, we intend to look at the journey so far, how far we've come, how we've improved, in terms of our own skills as podcasters, and also what we've discussed so far in the podcast, in the 3 main episodes we've released so far. The contents, what we've talked about, the history of Nigeria from ancient times. We've covered a history that's spanned at least how many years? About 4,000 years actually.
4,000.
It started 2000 BC, right? Yes. So we'll be taking a look at all that, and then we'll look at the way forward and what we have planned for the podcast at the end of everything today. All right. So, to start with, I will have to point out.
I'm really scared.
All right. To start with, I will have to bring out the manager himself to reintroduce himself. He did quite a job of it in the very first episode, so he has this ground to redeem himself, and then we'll start with him.
Okay, thank you. So he said I did a pretty poor job. in introducing myself last time.
That
Well,
was a joke anyways. It made the whole thing more interesting,
no, I don't think so. I was framed. I was recorded as
No, you weren't.
each of us.
You weren't. You yourself know you weren't because
I was framed.
I left out a part of that recording. Intentionally left it out. I still have it anyways. I'm dangling it over your head. The day I bring out that part of the recording, and then you are getting cancelled for real.
So I am Suleiman Abubakar. I'm a medical student here in Bayero University, and I'm a friend of the podcast.
Right. And the main man himself, of course. Right?
Yes.
Okay, so Suleiman, you listened to the episode so far.
Yes.
Right. What have you to say about the journey of the podcast so far?
That's been an interesting journey, but I think me praising the podcast is self-praise.
That's allowed to. Put your own.
Is it allowed?
Of course, you can hit your chest.
Okay, so
I think you've done a good job so far.
well, you've done a good job.
Right.
So as the executive manager, I haven't been doing a lot of the job, but
None of the job.
In fact, you started last week. So
I started last week.
yeah,
but
actually, the thing is, we're still putting him through.
But overall, I think from my experience, from most of the people I know, people lack a knowledge of the history, especially of the pre-colonial times of Nigeria. And I think the podcast has done a great job of bringing it forward to show that Nigeria actually existed before our colonial masters, and we have future after them.
Right. Okay, we'll come back to discuss a bit of some concerns afterwards. But yeah, thank you, Suleiman. Any input from the other members of the house about the journey of the podcast so far? Beginning with the first episode, where we did the introductory episode together, of course, and then afterwards, in the subsequent weeks, we started by looking at the prehistoric, occurrences in the land that is to become Nigeria as we know it today, and then afterwards we talked about the colonial history. Class rep.
Okay, so everything has been going well, I guess.
Yeah, first of all.
Yes, okay. Introducing myself, I am Murtala. I just want to praise the producers and the host for this podcast. It's not easy to undertake such a huge project, and then it's very easy to start, but the problem is always the continuity. Understand? So, and then that's something that I like how they've continued. They've been consistent, even though there was a delay with the, I think, as it said, third episode. There was a delay before it came out, but
the third episode, it came out late that day, right?
11:53 on Tuesday.
No,
Yeah.
actually, past 10.
Let's chop that down to technicalities. But
exactly.
we appreciate their work. It's not easy with the busy schedule and everything, keeping to time, and then always producing something that is beneficial. You understand? I bet their goal was to make something both fun and both educative, and I can say that they have checked those boxes. Now the only problem is the length. That's something I feel. This is my own personal opinion.
That was exactly what you said. The concern we would address, but please go on.
That's my personal opinion. That length, it's a bit long, and then phrasing. So if that can be addressed in the future episode, then to go a long way to help.
The addressing.
Yes, and I like how the fourth episode was just short and precise. And then
She didn't appreciate it.
It was precise, not particularly short, but yeah.
Yeah, it was. And then I like the direction you started with. Starting from the past to the present, because I feel a lot of the problems we have now currently in the country and everything stems from the poor knowledge of the past. We are not taught properly in schools and everything, so we just go with some basic knowledge of the country, thinking we know everything when we actually don't know much. So I like how it is, and then I urge them to continue and even do better in the future.
Right, and of course you are part of the podcast yourself. So.
Yes. So when the time comes, I will make my own appearance properly.
It's a collective job. It's a collective duty we have. Right. Olusheks.
Hi, this is Shegun. Thank you for having me in this wonderful and sincerely fun episode. In all honesty and beauty, I don't know much about Nigeria in the sense that I know more about history of other countries. We can rat out America had their independence year and year, but we don't even know the beauty about the history of our own country, because that's what the white man taught us. But listening to this podcast, I've gotten to know some beautiful stuff about Nigeria. I mean, I think some of our problems in Nigeria comes from lack of identity. We don't know who we are before the Britain, how they call them now?
Brits.
The Brits. Yeah, they call them. Yes, the colonial masters. We don't even know who we were. I mean, we're struck. I mean, listening to you guys, you hear stories about the strength of our forefathers, the complexity of their culture, the beauty of their art. But all we know was what those ones implanted when they came to our shores. So yes, this show has enlightened me and also some of my friends, and I hope we continue in this vein up till we get the populace educated about these things. So yes, thank you and kudos to you guys for actually taking this initiative to do this wonderful, wonderful show. Thank you.
Of course, the goal of bringing the issues that stem from our history and that lead to concerns in the present, of course, bringing it to the fore and educating the populace about it. That's still an ongoing project. In fact, the next mini series we'll be doing on the podcast will be focused mostly on that. We'll be talking about that at the end of the episode anyway. But before we continue with that, Mr. T, I believe you have something for us.
Sure, definitely. Personally, I think we guys are actually doing a great job here. Every major project begins with baby steps, and this is even much more than baby steps. Educating us about our history, it's a very fundamental part of our existence and our survival. Because I personally feel that if you want to tame a people for life, you deny them of their history. So digging deep into our past, correlating it with our future and where we're heading to, I mean that's remarkable. It's not easy. So I think we're actually moving towards the right direction. And of course, listeners should expect much more and we'll be their asses to their seats. Thanks.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I'm Ahmed Musa Muhammad. Okay, actually, as I've been following the program from the beginning, at least I will also say that along the way I've learned about a lot of things about the country, more especially about the history. Most of the time when people are talking about the history of Nigeria, they mostly talk about from colonization. We really find stories that talk about Nigeria before colonization, and so I really found that very important. At least it shows that we are somewhere before these people came to meet us, and that will also help us in knowing the kind of relationship, as in what we usually think about these people. Here the colonizers. As most especially, you can see that from the way we even got our independence. It wasn't that we overwhelmed them to the extent that maybe they have no other choice, but to give us it was their wish. It was not like we forced them into doing that. It was like they were helping us, and we can't expect people who had that kind of mindset when they were colonizing people. We should not think that they will be good to us, just from seeing how they related with us from the beginning. Their ideas about us, what they think about us, thinking like whether even if we are humans or not. It is not like we shouldn't relate with them, but yeah, we should know the kind of people we are relating with, and that would be very important. Okay, so far along the journey there from the beginning, as you know, now we have heard of the history of Nigeria, and the history started since far days before colonization and everything. And so now we have heard of the story of Nigeria, and then later on we including the colonization, and then later on we get to know the effect of colonization on Nigeria. So now at least we have had a summary of how Nigeria started before it reached to where we are now. So I think so far, probably in the future, after seeing how things are going, we might have more things to say. But right now, I think things are going pretty well.
All right. Muri raised the concern that we tried to address in the episode 4, in the last episode, right, about the length of the first two episodes, especially. Right, they were over an hour long each. at least the second one was.
The second one was over an
was-
hour,
no,
while
the
the
second
first
one was almost an hour.
Yes, 59 minutes.
26 seconds.
26 seconds.
Exactly.
Right. The second one, the third one was over an hour.
1
Yeah.
hour 2 minutes, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
So in the last episode, we explained that we had to, the episodes had to be that long because there was so much we had to discuss there. In fact, as long as they were, there was so much that we had to leave out. Because okay, what I decided to do was okay, I took some of those parts and then I moved them to further episodes that we'll be discussing later on in the podcast. There was things like okay, we discussed how the country got its name from the River Niger, right? But
Yes.
a very interesting part of that history was the discussion about the so-called discovery of the Niger itself. Right? Every school child in Nigeria today is taught that Mungo Park
Yes.
discovered a river,
Existed before
right?
him.
A river that existed before. So the river itself, the history, talking about the modern history, the prehistoric history, and then the geological history, it's particularly interesting. For example, this is a fact about that now. Do you know that River Niger actually, right, geologically and prehistorically, wasn't just one river, right? It was two rivers, actually.
Interesting.
Right. It was in two parts. The first part was the part that arose from the basins of the streams from Futa Jalon, right, up to there is a bend, a sharp bend in the river around the southwestern end of Niger Republic there, right? Now that's the first part of the river. The second part of the river arose from the Niger Delta in Nigeria here and rose up to meet it. And historically, they weren't just one river; they were two rivers. And then over years, they eroded their shores and then they joined and became one river over the years, right? That's an interesting piece that we couldn't include in the episode where we discussed the naming of Nigeria, how Nigeria derived its name from that. And then talking about the discovery itself, the so-called discovery by Mungo Park.
Yes.
Mungo Park himself never. They said he discovered the source, right?
Yes.
But he never really traveled the length of the river, right? He started from the extreme end of West Africa, right? But he died in Bossa in Niger State.
Yes.
So he never actually got to
The end of the
So
river.
although he discovered that okay, he traced the course of the river beyond the sharp bend, but he didn't actually know if he had discovered the whole of the Niger River, if he traced the length.
But they say history is written by the winners, right?
Well,
Exactly.
One-sided. So
Exactly. So
the funny part is
most of us
the funny
didn't
part
even
here
notice.
is
Yes.
the funny part here is that the men, or rather the man that later on a couple of years after came up with the discovery, right, that these rivers actually linked, these rivers that people actually believed were different rivers initially were actually one river, right, and traveled the whole length. They themselves, they know that although they are British guys, their name actually are not well known today, probably due to the shady history of how the discovery itself was done.
Yeah,
there was a different explorer was exploring the length of the river. They were with him, and then the guy died along the way. The expedition was cancelled. The brothers came back and they continued from where they stopped. One of them died during the expedition. The other one was captured as a slave and then transported down the river. And then he was the one that came up with the report that okay, he traveled the length of the river with all this that happened along the way, and that's how it went.
It's quite a very similar story to the one
of America back.
and even Mount Everest.
I'm telling you,
Where-
I'm
I
getting
think
the Christopher
discovery-
Columbus vibes.
yeah, nobody.
Yes, I mean, and that's talking about the journey of the explorers and not about the people who had lived in these areas over all these years, right?
Yeah.
All these years, and who actually knew that this was one river. Because okay, we talk about the explorers coming in and trading in these places, but actually these people, the inhabitants of this region, actually have been trading along the length of the river for years, for centuries, prior to the arrival of the explorers.
Yeah, well.
So they knew, right? They knew about, because many of the explorers in themselves employed the locals of the places.
Yes,
as
definitely.
guides. So these people knew, but you don't, of course, hear them being mentioned in the historical books.
No, it will be more even
All we do
accurate.
is
It will be more
go
accurate
back.
for us to use the
Dying in
folklores of these indigenous people as history rather than using what these men wrote for us to do.
Right?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, because of we believe poor documentation. You understand? That's why we don't have much about this, and that's one of the things I appreciate, like going and doing the research and getting all these tiny details that we actually do need. Because if not listening to this podcast, I would have never known what I know now about the country, particularly going that far back into the past. Like in primary and secondary school, I'm not sure I've had enough knowledge that I just gained from listening just an episode. Even though it was long, but well.
But you even taught Nigerian history in secondary school.
That's the thing, sir.
That's its appearing parts. If I've never been there myself from what I learned.
Right? It's just
but-
a couple topics in social studies
And that's just it.
Yeah, but I don't know if we are trying to maybe make these guys feel bad for coming to do what our own fathers then couldn't do. Because I mean, how could you be using a river and then probably you're not concerned about the costs and then whatever the source and all those stuff?
But we can't
These
say
guys
we-
came,
Yes,
so-
that's the truth actually. We can't say whether they did it or they didn't do
So
it.
poor documentation
Yes,
now as our own.
Yes, that's what we were told.
disadvantage. I mean,
Now the deal
Who knows?
is the deal
What
is this.
if the documents were burnt?
Yes.
It's a possibility.
it's more of those who are in charge, the masters.
Yes.
to-
Again, you said
to-
history written by the victors.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
actually true. Yeah.
The deal is this: when they trace the course of the river, right? They did it for a reason, not just for the sense of adventure, because people were dying trying to do that. It was primarily for their economic concerns. The people here already use the river for their trade, right? Now, the colonial masters had to trace the course because they had to understand that okay, this river that started from this end of the continent, where exactly, how long does it travel inland, and where exactly does it? Because they need to use, it was easier to use the course of the river as a source of transport than to go on land. The lands are particularly hostile to the foreigners, especially, right?
doesn't
That's why
really-
it took them so long to make inroads into the part of the context.
yeah.
Check Northern Nigeria, for example. We discussed a bit of that in the third episode about how it took them
Longer
decades.
time
Yes.
to reach the north.
Even after the colonization, the annexation of Lagos, it took them. It was almost half a century later before they were actually able to make inway into the northern part of the country, at least to any reasonable extent. So the reason they did that was mostly for their own economic reasons.
Yeah. And know about the course of the river. If you trace as a Fulani man, of course I know Fulani history. If you trace the course of the river, it will tell you the course of Fulani history. From
Right.
Futa Jolon, that's where Fulani people originated. And Fulani people have been herding cows and everything along the river, and that's how they came to Nigeria. They followed the river. So I don't think it's the foreigners that came here and did something. Fulani people from Guinea-Bissau tracked the river its whole length and arrived in Nigeria. And that's how Fulani people started.
Because it just wouldn't make sense to say we didn't know
Yeah.
this thing before
Anything
they
about
went.
it.
Anything you want to know about the Fulani history is about that
You
course.
can't defend
When we're
that.
Yeah,
there,
you can't
when
defend
we're
them
there.
until you can.
Yeah.
You cannot defend that in the future.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
So
Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Just
now.
to say,
yeah. Well, either way, it can be or not be. So whatever, we're not sure.
on the recurring issue about the length of the podcast, I don't know, it's been listeners have been coming to speak to me, and therefore I'm enjoying the content of this podcast. But the length, I don't know, can you guys reduce it? The simple answer to that is the history we have in store to give Nigerians in general can't just minimize and just let to just belittle, you understand? So we
right?
exactly the hours we spent was not something we could have just reduced.
We cannot summarize our own
Exactly.
history. We don't want to actually. We
Yeah.
don't want to summarize the history. It's still beautiful for us to ignore those nuances that actually make up the beauty of Nigeria itself. Instead of just taking the broad summarization of things.
Like I said, we're working on it, and yeah, with time, of course, we'll try
So
to.
that means
shorten
for now, I
the
think it's
length
more
of
of
episode.
the time will be based on the content you're giving for that particular moment.
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah, and like I said, those first two episodes, especially, right? What we discussed there are things that we'll have to refer back to. with time. So subsequently, when we refer back to them, we won't have to discuss so much about them, right? We'll just refer back to them and say, okay, we discussed this
Remember in the second episode, yeah.
Always go back to that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Process.
Murtala, what was your favorite part of the 3 long episode series?
Yeah, I feel the latest episode.
long series.
Yeah, well, I guess the last one, which is the 4th, right? The one about colonization. Yes, I feel that should be my favorite among all of them. Because
Please don't mention the length.
okay, no, obviously length is not the problem. What I meant is that the reason why I appreciated that most is because I'm not speaking bad on the previous 2 episodes or anything. They are all important, but I feel like, okay, from the colonization parts to Nigeria as it is now, as an average Nigerian, I feel that part of history is quite very important, you understand, for an average Nigerian. The other part, well, we can do or do without it, but like understanding what happened during the colonial period, you understand, is part of what has led to what we are now. So proper understanding of that, you understand, is what makes me enjoy that. That made me enjoy that particular episode, and that's why it's definitely my favorite. Excluding the first episode, that the introductory episode, not the first one that was like those ones.
The legacy of colonization.
Exactly.
That's the 4th one.
Yes.
Now, about that, going into that episode, right, it was one that I had concerns for because it's a potentially very controversial episode.
Yes.
The topics we talked there were very potentially controversial.
Yeah.
Right. We were recording it, and I was actually went into it mindfully, trying to control
to avoid the
unnecessary controversies because
the landmines that is the topic.
Yeah, there are so many landmines.
Definitely.
I also had to skirt around many of the subjects there because actually the thing is I skirted around it not because I wanted to shy away from it totally, but because I had to save many of those topics for another day. There are many of those things that are things we still have to come back to and discuss again. But for then, I just had to brush over them a bit. Of course, we did mention some of those things there, but then, like I said, we'll have to go back to it later on, subsequently, as we discuss on them.
Mr. T, so what do you have to say about the legacy of the colonization itself? Just, you've listened to the episode, I presume.
Yeah, actually, the legacy of colonization. I mean, everything we do today, the politics around and everything taps a little, if not much more.
Everything.
Actually, of course, I don't want to go totally because people actually now agree.
Totally.
Anyway, I think it taps a lot from actually what happened during the colonial period. Because the whole thing is more like if you ask, like you said, you don't want to step on some landmines. Like you ask, you don't want to step on some landmines. But then, if you really want to have most of our controversies presently go to what actually happened during the colonial period, and it's good actually you bring these things out. And you were saying that we're trying to circumvent some landmines. Thank God you actually brought that clarification on, because when I actually listened to it, I felt probably you were not being judicious about the topic. But it's good that some listeners now will have a better understanding why that actually ensued. So it's more like what's in the appetite.
Yes,
what's to come in
we
the
did.
future,
I made a mention that the episode came out too late for our NSAS special. That's something we have in mind. It will be coming out subsequently, but that will be further on into the podcast. All right, but talking about that episode 4, discuss the legacy of colonization, right? Historically, in talking about the modern history of Nigeria, perhaps the most important piece of history, that is the most important legacy of colonization in Nigeria, was Nigerian Civil War. We barely even mentioned that in that episode. So that was something I had in mind. And why we didn't spend much time touching on that was because actually we will go at length and do a multi-part series right? Multi-part episode.
I think we should invite
On-
Mr. T.
Definitely.
I would love to be there.
It'll definitely be there when we do that. We'll do a multi-part episode on the historical events surrounding the civil war in Nigeria. Right. And yes, Muri, you say goodbye to our listeners.
Yes, unfortunately, I have some commitment that I have to attend to right now. So I have to take my leave now. But I'll definitely listen to the rest of this because
Yes,
it's
you
very
meet
important.
us.
I'll be coming on to the show.
Yes.
You meet us on the line
Yes.
and the
yes.
subsequent episodes, of
Yes.
course.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Alright then.
We'll be out.
Subsequently. Alright. The manager himself has something to say.
Well, I want to talk about my favorite episode.
Right.
I think my favorite episode is the first one in the miniseries. Obviously not the introduction,
Yes.
but the first one about our pre-colonial past.
Yeah.
Yes. The one talking about no culture.
My
Think
favorite.
no culture.
You continue.
No culture gave me a bit nostalgia of secondary school when our secondary teacher taught us about it, and it opened my head then. Because then I used to watch a lot of documentaries, archaeological documentaries. They've discovered this in Egypt. They've discovered this in Iran. They've discovered this in... But I've always asked my father, why are we not having something like this? Why? As a child,
Yeah,
when you
the
want to see
story is
that,
made here.
you want to see yourself represented in what you are watching on TV. Yes. So when I had that, this culture was discovered by archaeologists, I was excited. And to think that we do have archaeologists, people that are trying to actively find our history, is very encouraging. And I want to encourage other archaeologists out there. Some people have been studying it in university and people think it's a redundant thing to study in university, but I think it's very important in our lives that we know our past. Thank you.
Particularly because, like we discussed in that particular episode, we said many of these things are being unearthed, but because they are being unearthed by people who are not professionals and they don't have the training to do these things, they end up destroying it in the process. And that's not even to mention on people who go to these sites that have been marked for archaeological studies, and then they steal many of these artifacts from the ground there, and then they sell it, at prices that are not even appropriate. They don't really reflect the true value
Yeah.
of this artifact.
And showcase it in museum.
Right.
London Museum.
You should have mentioned them.
Well, we did mention a lot of names in that.
So, Olusegun, sorry for that. You've been dying to talk about your favorite.
Oh yes, I'm so excited.
Yeah,
Okay.
man.
Yes. Now I would like to claim the distinction of the most ignorant person on this podcast.
You're welcome.
I doubt that.
Yeah. And in all honesty, I have heard of the Nook culture, or like Nok or Nook, depending on how you guys pronounce it. And I've only seen it in passing. But in all honesty, I don't know what it. I didn't even know it was related to Nigeria. Up until I listened, I was like, whoa! So we can dig stuff out in Nigeria. I mean, you mentioned in Jos, they found some good old stuff in Jos.
Yes.
And I was like, wait. So it's possible I might just put on a hat, shorts, and a shovel.
Yes, some diggers.
And then I'll go exploring Indiana Jones
Some
and
old stuff.
Kofarua. I know it's so exciting that we
Now,
have.
if you're talking about doing that in Kano, you'll have to go to Gorondute, because in the episode we have planned for Kano, the history of Kano, we'll discuss a lot about
Yeah, I can't wait
that
for you
hill at
guys to do
Gorondute and the history of that hill, of course.
Not just
Not go to
all
say.
over Kano.
I mean,
Yeah, definitely. But if you're talking about Kano, we're talking about that
history.
hill.
Yeah,
Goronte
I
has a
understand.
very important part in
No,
this.
I feel
Yeah,
you guys are
actually.
missing one of the most beautiful sites in Kano State.
Okay,
Where was the Granite Pyramid located precisely?
that's on the way to Kuruna.
They are not there.
And the city walls.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah,
that's where I was going.
yeah,
The city was. I mean,
But don't
But
worry.
These are some of the things we discuss about when we
It's
talk
way more
about
important.
the early colonial history. But
that was one of the things that got me excited about the episode was the fact that we have these things here, and they are not as venerated as, say, those obelisks you have in other countries. I mean,
But
you
as
go.
the Great Wall of
You
China.
go to Kano, you'll be passing those walls and you see them demolish it to build.
Oh. Talking about walls, we have walls and then some in Nigeria.
Great Wall
The
of Benin.
ancient wall of Kano, the Great Wall of Benin, right? That was said to be longer than the Great Wall of China,
yeah, of
right?
course.
So
Yeah.
what happened to the Wall of Benin?
No,
What is happening to the Wall of Kano? Now the Wall of Benin has a more tragic history. Depends on how you look at it, because one was destroyed by foreigners, one is being destroyed by its own people, right? Right. So those are things we will look at subsequently. We have episodes plans for many of these major cities in Nigeria, and we'll be looking at it subsequently. So
I think it's time to round up.
Right. So, dear listeners, thank you, Ada.
if we leave the scientists now to talk,
Right.
He's a scientist, I mean. Have you ever listened to Nobel Prize inauguration lecture?
What is listening to this stuff?
We mentioned Wole Soyinka's Nobel Prize acceptance.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
right, thank you. Like you're saying, you've heard us discuss at length about the podcast, what we've done so far, and particularly about what is to come in the podcast. So please stay with us. We have a lot planned. We have so much content that's already waiting for us to just go and record it. So please stay with us. If you're not following us yet, we are at 0100 Naija on Facebook, on AudioMac, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. Right, we will link all these platforms in the description of this episode too, of course, like we've always done in the subsequent episodes.
Like, what are you using your life to do daily if you're not listening to this? I mean,
right?
Subscribe to it.
Right. Also some say it might take a bit of active energy to listen to the podcast to assimilate the content, but I believe it's audio, so you can always listen to audio content while you're doing some other thing, right?
That's the beauty of it, actually.
I mean,
Right. So
listening to this voice is pleasure.
Yes, it is.
that sounds weird. I'll take it. All right. Any final words from you, Mr. T, please?
Oh, we've said everything already.
I doubt.
Just sit. Of course, you can't say everything actually. I mean, I'm just being contextual. But we've said a lot actually. So, I mean, just sit and listen and expect much more to come. Of course, we'll be getting much more from our show. The scientists, we are digging more and more.
Thank you, Mr. T. Olusheks.
Oh yes, I have. Okay, yes. Where's the refreshment you promised us? The refreshment you promised us.
Yeah, you signed a bond before appearing on this episode.
Naturally.
Yeah, and it will be coming in 2 years' time. Thank you.
And with me, it's a simple goodbye.
Yeah, that's the manager, of course.
Alright,
Suleiman,
guys.
aka
Fine signing out.
the boy.
Now I end my own now. Can you guys help me end it?
Out. Right, I think the scientists turning out too. Look for us online. We are at 0100 Naija. 0100 Naija, like you said, is spelled 01-00 Naija. Thank you, and catch you on the next one.